Well, now that we know a little bit about what a pivot table is, let's see how to build one. We need to start by looking at our data. Having the data that will be the source for the pivot table organized in a good format will make it much easier to create a meaningful pivot table. Let's go to our Data List of Homes tab and just look at the data for a second. Like I said, we want to make sure it's well formatted. For pivot tables and other Excel features, Excel works best with a contiguous range of data. And that means it doesn't want to see empty columns in the middle of your data or empty rows. It wants to see everything kind of bunched up together if it can. There could be spaces in there, but not a complete row or column. Excel also wants to see a header row over the data. And a header row is typically the first row of your spreadsheet, and it basically has the title of the column you're looking at. So column A is a street address, B is a city, state, zip code, etc. Now the other thing we're going to do is we're going to use this table to build our pivot table. Now you can absolutely use cell addresses to make a pivot table. I could just highlight what I wanted. But what I think we're going to do, just because it works better, is we're going to actually give this table a named range, and then we're going to build our pivot table off the named range. And basically what that'll do is if we add or delete things to this table, it'll be easier to update the pivot table based on a named range. So all we need to do is click on one cell in our table. And again, if we've got well formatted data surrounded by blank columns and rows, Excel will detect that I want to use this whole table. For my Tables tab, I'm going to choose a table style. And that's all I had to do to format it as a table. So now from here, I'm going to click the Rename Table command, and Excel brings me over to the name box, and I'm going to call this the Realty Database. Hit Return, and that's it. And now I can go ahead and build a pivot table off of that. From my Tables tab, all the way at the end is a command that says Summarize with Pivot Table. So I'll just click that. Now typically if you're on a table with a named range, Excel will automatically fill in that named range for you, Realty Database. This also could have been a cell address, A1 to G200. This first section is just identifying where the data is that's going to build that pivot table. Now it's going to say where to put this pivot table. You can put a pivot table on an existing worksheet, but most of the time pivot tables are dynamic. That means they'll grow and shrink based on the data and the filters. So I really emphasize and try to put pivot tables on a new worksheet whenever possible, and just leave them all by themselves. So we'll click OK. Now what happened here is we got a little pivot table area built here on the left, and our pivot table builder came up on the right that shows all the things we can build. And if you look at this first section has the field names. These are nothing more than the column headers we had in our well-formatted table. We have street address, city, state, zip, bedrooms, bathrooms, and price. And then we have 4 sections which we're going to put the elements for our pivot table in. The report filters, column labels, row labels, and values. One thing to point out, if you're working in the pivot table, you might sometimes see that pivot table builder go away and not know how to get it back. Well, that just means you've clicked somewhere else in the worksheet. Excel thinks you're trying to do some other type of work. To get that back, all you have to do is go back to your pivot table area and just click on it, and the pivot table builder will come back. So let's start building our pivot table. Let's go down and get the number of bedrooms, and we're going to click and drag that down to row labels. And you see how Excel already starts building the table. It's going to build this thing on the fly as we drop elements in. So right now I've got row labels 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's add the number of bathrooms to the column labels across the top. So we'll click and drag on bathrooms and go over here. And you see Excel built out with all the values that are possible in our data. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 bathrooms. So I'm going to go ahead and reformat these columns right now. Well, now it's time to add some data there. So let's scroll down in our field list, and the only really thing we have that we can aggregate to do a metric on is price. So let's click that and let's drag that to the values section. By default, Excel will take a guess, as it does in many cases, as to what we want to do with the price. And a guess we wanted to sum it up. In a lot of cases, that's probably a good guess. But in the case of a realty database, we don't want the sum of all the houses at a particular combination. We would want to know the minimum or the maximum or the average, or we might just want to count. So if Excel chooses the wrong aggregation for your data, it's really easy to change. On your builder, you'll see in the value section you've got a field labeled sum of price. That's what we dropped in there. To the right of that's this little information button. If you click that, you can modify the different aspects of that field. And right now the field name is sum of price, and it's summarizing it by sum. Well, what if we just want to get a count, like our first pivot table? So let's click on count, summarize by count. Now it says count of price, and that's going to be the field name that shows up on the pivot table. Let's make it a little nicer there too. Let's just say number of properties. And then we'll click OK. There we go. Now we have just a simple count of every row that makes up a data at an intersection. And again, it's easy enough to change. You just click the information on it. You can change the aggregation to something else. Now let's look at how to change this around a little bit. We saw in our demo how this is more of a tabular format. We've got official row labels and we've got column labels across the top. The second table we looked at in our demo had more of an outline view. There weren't different column labels, but the row and column labels were staggered. So what if we want that look for this pivot table? Well, it's easy. All we do is go to the pivot table builder, and where the bathrooms are in column labels, just drag it down to the row labels underneath bedrooms. And that will show the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. Comes with a little arrow there. If I click the arrow or double click, it'll roll it all up. And if I double click again, it'll expand it to see what all the components are. We're going to see how to actually label these differently in one of the next couple lessons. Let's say we want to see the number of bathrooms before bedrooms. Easy enough, just click it, drag it in front of the number of bedrooms. And now we have bathrooms first, then bedrooms. So now we're sorting by the number of bathrooms and how many bedrooms are in each house. And if we want to move it back to column labels, that's even easier. Just drag it back to column labels and we're back to where we started. Now the last thing we're going to do in this lesson is build our report filter. In our example, we had city, state, and zip. So all we need to do is click and drag those three fields into the report filter section. And zip. Now, a lot of people might ask, well, what's really the difference between having something as a row label versus a report filter? Let's take city, for example, and put it in front of bedrooms. Now we're showing the cities, but within each city we're showing the number of bedrooms in a grid like this. So the city's actually showing the data. And that is the main difference. When you have something as a row or column header, it's going to show all the values. If you put that in the header section and you do a filter, if you do more than one city, you're not going to see what that is, what that combination is when you're just looking at this grid. Now, if you know what it was, if you know the cities you selected, that's good. That's a positive thing. But these report filters they're for bigger, broader strokes in filtering your data. You'd use them for a region, again, or a state, or a city. And typically, a lot of people will just pick one option or a couple that make sense together for report filters. But that's all there is to building them. You just drag them to the report filter section. So we've just learned how to build a simple pivot table, and as you do more, you're going to see that building the actual table is not very difficult at all. The real work comes in determining what you actually want to communicate, which fields to show, which should be part of the pivot, and how you want the data to look to the end user.